Ding Ganren's grandson, who is the father of my informant, Dr. Ding Yi, he had something to do with Lu Yuanlei. And I thought, okay, they must be somehow opposed to each other, because one is kind of like this conservative tradition, the other one is this kind of radical modernizer. And then Ding Yi, Dr. Ding, he was my informant, he said, what are you talking about? Lu Yuanlei, he used to come to our house, every week, and they used to have dinner, and they were great friends, and they were blah, 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 blah. So maybe they had different opinions about how Chinese medicine should be developed, but they agreed on very many other things. They could talk about cases, they could have dinner together, they could talk about opera and whatever, politics and whatever else connected them in the world, yes?
I'm Michael Max, and this is Geological, the podcast that curates East Asian medicine and methods through the power of conversation. The thing I most love about acupuncture is how it gives me a glimpse into the workings of the 10,000 things that opens a portal into a nonlinear world full of surprising interactions. East Asian medicine affords us a perspective that allows you to watch the system as you're interacting with it. It also provides potent treatment for bothersome problems. The other thing I like about acupuncture is that it's weird. It really is. When you think about how a few small pinprick needles can bring forth such unusual healing responses, it truly is a curiosity. I remember getting interested in acupuncture and having my first acupuncturist hand me a copy of The Web That Has No Weaver. It didn't really help me to grasp just how this stuff worked. I couldn't make sense of it in any kind of satisfying way. None of what I read could fit into anything else that I thought I understood about the world. I came away from the first reading with not much more than the recognition that everything I thought I understood about the world would probably not be helpful in trying to understand acupuncture. Taking a run at the Eastland Press Shanghai text on acupuncture, that confirmed there was a whole other world that I was going to have to learn to inhabit if I wanted to grasp this strange stuff that I knew from my experience to be effective, and yet I could not overlay any map of the world that I already had onto it. At first, I thought I could get away with inhabiting the world of acupuncture metaphorically. It does, after all, invite us in that way, and while metaphor can be a kind of a bridge, it didn't provide the kind of solid ground that I could root into with a sense of stability or traction. I wanted something that seemed physically reliable. I wanted something that felt like gravity and physics, something that I could A/B test, a method where I could see how an input was digested and then transformed into an output. As a kid, I loved reading fantasy and science fiction. The fantasy fed the imagination, and that's worth cultivating. The science fiction gave me a rooting into the techno know-how that any complex interactive system surely must have and be nameable in order to function. Acupuncture school for me was an ongoing leap of faith, a trust that something was going to gel if I inhabited this very bizarre world of metaphor, correspondence, and physiology that broke the maps of my world. For the longest time, I tried to scientize and unweird acupuncture. Maybe I've finally arrived at a place where I'm more comfortable with the unconventional, where I can live with more ease in the multiverse of Western science and the worldview East Asian medicine offers that has nothing to do with the scientific method. Acupuncture, East Asian medicine, it is weird. And that's not a bug. That's a feature. Of course, you could say that Western scientific thought is strange as well. The idea that it is possible to stand outside of reality and watch it without interacting with it. That, too, is a curious way to focus consciousness. A good set of critical thinking skills, that can be helpful. And as we hear with Volker Scheid in this conversation, it takes some time and attention to acquire those. Volker has walked the intertwining paths of medicine, anthropology, and history. While many of us lean on the history of East Asian medicine as a talisman or marketing ploy, Volker has undertaken the study and natural history of Chinese medicine in both an academic and clinical way. His books on medicine in China and the exploration of the influences of social networks in his work with the Monke clan are worthwhile reading if you want to deepen your connection for the context of the work that you do in clinic. There are some surprising things that you'll learn about how medicine gets passed from one person to another and the roots of where much of our modern holistic thought actually comes from. I think you're going to enjoy this conversation. We'll be right back after a few words from the folks that make it possible for you to enjoy Qiological. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. It's Women's Health Month at Mayway Herbs. Check out their new website for learning resources on helping women with herbal medicine. Are you a creature of habit? How about making a change that helps your patients and the planet with AccuFast needles? And later in the show, raising your fees doesn't have to be a difficult process. Jane has helpful suggestions on making it easy and effective. And finally, have you considered that having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things that you can do? Julie Bear Don't Walk has, and she can help you do something about it too. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Qiological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more.
Hi folks, I'm Yvonne Lau, president of Mayway Herbs. May is Women's Health Month, and as a women-owned and women-run business, we especially love how Chinese medicine can support wellness through every stage of a woman's life. So in this month's newsletter and podcast, we're covering topics like PMS, pregnancy, menopause, and osteoporosis. We'll share expert insights and effective treatment strategies you can put to good use in your clinic. Our Plumflower brand line includes herbal tea pills, tablets, extract granules, and organic herbs, all of which you can find on Mayway.com, and where you can also find articles, videos, and other resources to support your practice. Since 1969, Mayway has been a trusted source for high-quality herbal products. In these challenging times, please know that we remain committed to keeping our products accessible and affordable so you can take care of yourself and your patients. As always, thank you for supporting Real Chinese Medicine.
Daily habits and routines feel comforting, familiar, easy, automatic. That's the power of repetition. You've worked out the kinks and can do it with your eyes closed. But what if you shook things up? What if you ditched the old routine and tried something new? Hi, I'm John Sten. I've practiced acupuncture for over 30 years, and together with my wife Kelly, we created the world's first eco-friendly acupuncture needle. The AccuFast earth-friendly needle system cuts your packaging waste by 60 to 90%, depending upon your needle type, speeds up your needling, gives you more control, and best of all, while you're healing patients, we plant a tree for every 2 boxes your clinic uses. Thousands of acupuncturists have already made the switch. In just the last year, they've helped plant over 16,000 trees. Since we started, that number has grown to over 50,000. So break the routine. Be the change. Visit AccuFastNeedles.com. Your patients and the planet will thank you.
Volker Scheid, welcome back to Geological.
Thanks. Nice to talk to you again. Thanks for having me on this podcast of yours.
I'm delighted. Today we're having a bit of a history conversation, and I always like to ask people at the beginning of one of these to turn back the hands of the clock a little bit. Go back to the time when you first heard about acupuncture. I'm always curious to know, like as a young person, what was going on in the world, like the world, like what were the issues of the day? And, like as a kid, what was going on for you that you heard about acupuncture? Like, first of all, how did that happen? And what sparked an interest in you? That's kind of a weird thing as a young person.
Well, I think it is. In my case, I think it is and it isn't. Maybe I should say that, first of all, I would like to say that I really, really enjoy your history series. Yes, I think it's really important for me to say that because I'm a historian, as you know, part of me is a historian. So for you to create this archive, I think is a fantastic job. Yes, both for our profession and maybe in the future some historians want to write the history of Chinese medicine in the US and in the English-speaking West. And I think what you are creating here, this kind of like living archive, is going to be a super resource for this. Yes, so I first want to thank you for all of that. Yes.
Well, you're welcome. If there is a future historian listening to this and digging it up like we dug up stuff from Ma Huangdui, then you're welcome and hope you enjoy it.
And then I've listened to kind of not every single one, but quite a few of these. Yes. Okay. And again, as a historian, when we think about history, there's kind of like two big ways of doing history or writing history. And the one way of writing history is the history of the big persons. So like history being created by individuals almost, yes. And usually men in the way history has been written in the West. But in a certain way, your series reminds me a little bit about it because it's individuals and it seems like the individuals creating this, yes, which I think is a very valid approach. But I think there's also the other approach that kind of like dominates contemporary history. And that is really where the people are more like the flotsam on top of the water. Because there's really bigger, kind of like sometimes very long-term currents and shorter waves. But these waves or currents are really created by things like economics and climate and stuff like that. And what people do is really kind of like, to some historians, is not so relevant because they just fit in. Maybe a good perspective to take is, there are these waves and the waves create opportunity for some people. They can ride the wave, as it were.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
And some people get carried away by the waves. Yes, they don't see them coming, and then just stuff happens to them, good or bad. Yes, okay. So I thought maybe rather than start at the beginning, in a way, I thought I start at the end, if that's okay with you. And I start at the end with an incredible, interesting case that I had the opportunity treating recently. And I thought I'd tell you about the case, and then not to show off, but I thought this case triggered a lot of stuff for me. It's kind of like, how does a guy who grew up in what I call the Arkansas of West Germany, kind of like really hillbilly country in a way, how did this guy end up treating people in the way that I will describe to you? Is that okay with you? If you'd like that?
I can't wait. I always like, Volker, I always like a story well told.
Okay.
Right? And like starting at, like, why not start at the end?
Yeah. So, okay. Anyway, this I get, because I teach quite a bit, and so a considerable part of my patients are patients that haven't been responding to Chinese medical treatment of other practitioners. Yes. Okay. So this is one of these cases. Yes. Okay. So this is a lady in her 40s, early 40s, and she suffered since the age, I think, of 12. She had alopecia, And she also had, at the same time, hirsutism, so kind of like excessive growth of hair on the rest of her body. And this was when she was, from what I understand, around age 12. This was kind of like 2 years before her menarche. Yeah, okay, so before she actually had periods, yes? So in all this, so this is 12, so this is like 28 years now. In these 28 years, she's gone through a lot of biomedical treatment, psychotherapy, a lot of psychological interventions, because there's kind of like some trauma apparently in the background, which I don't know that much about. And then, of course, Chinese medicine, yes, okay? And nothing has really helped this person. And so, when you're in a situation like that, on the one hand, it's, you're relieved of the pressure of, because so much else has failed, yes? So, it's kind of quite an advantageous position in a certain way to be in, yes? Because everybody else has failed, so why should you succeed? But also, from when I get cases like that from a Chinese medicine point of view, other people have already tried a lot of stuff, so I don't have to do that. Yes.
Yeah, you don't have to make the same mistake.
Yes, okay. I have a certain kind of advantage. Yes,
that's right, for sure.
But there's also, of course, some pressure. Yes, okay, because you have to come up with some non-conventional stuff in a certain way. Yes, okay. So anyway,
well, this is really the fun part of doing the work that we do.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you look at something and go, what is this?
Yes.
I mean, like, really, this is weird. What is it? It's super fun.
It is. So in this particular case, I don't want to list all the symptoms and signs and everything. Yes. Okay. But apparently what had happened to this person, partly because of the actual physical complaints, because she really had loads and loads of hair overgrowth, yes, in her face particular. So, and also the other trauma in her life. So she had over time withdrawn from the world. So at this moment in time, when I first talked to her, the only person apparently that she was engaging in was her Chinese medicine practitioner. She was not engaging with anybody else anymore in the world. Yes. Okay. And she obviously wasn't feeling very good about this. And she had insomnia issues, a whole load of other some physical issues. But anyway, I thought, what can I do here? What is the main issue at stake? And I thought, okay, the main issue at stake for me that I can see is this difficulty to engage with the world. And how does that difficulty to engage with the world relate with her physical problems? So she has a lot of growth of hair in her exterior of her body. So this is kind of like an excess. The lung governs the hair, the body hair. So there is an excess in the exterior, whether you want to call it lung or taiyang or whatever. So I thought, so that is one side of the story. The other side of the story is that over recent years, because of my work as a historian, I have become incredibly involved in let's say, the Confucian relationship between Chinese medicine and Chinese culture, so to speak, yes? And one of the many things that I have learned is that when Confucians or classical scholars, as we might call them, thought about some of the most important values that you would have as a Confucian about how people should be in this world. So two of the most important values I think that they have are filiality, your relationship to your ancestors, and the other, so xiao, and then the other value is called ren, which is most often translated as benevolence, but it has got to do with your relationship with other beings in this world, yes, okay? A certain kind of care, both being able to care for other people and being cared for. And if you, and we translate these things like filiality or benevolence, they kind of like, simply the translations, they kind of like as if they are attitudes that we carry around with us. But if you go quite deeply into how people, I think, at the time thought about them, these kind of ways of how we interact with others and the world, they're kind of like, to these people, were very material, by which I mean they are predicated on qi. So when we have a relationship to our ancestors, that is because we share the same, some of the same qi with them, and that flows between us and them. And when we care for other things in this world, other people or other things, then that is because Ren, like in Chinese medicine, and this is what these Confucians quote, Bu-Ren, as you might know, Bu-Ren is like when we become insensitive, when we have when we can't feel anything in our limbs. That is called insensitivity, is in Chinese medicine is Bu-Ren. And it's the same character, Ren, like the person with the two strokes on the side. Yes, okay, or like two peaks.
That's interesting. So it's not a lack of benevolence, it's a lack of feeling.
Yeah, but the feeling it's a lack of feeling, but that feeling is mediated by qi.
Mm-hmm.
Yes? And the way they call it is like becoming one body with the 10,000 things. So for you to care for something, like other people and yourself, has got something to do with the qi being able to flow in and out of us and connect with other things. So going back to this particular patient, obviously, if there's a kind of like thickening of her skin, so to speak, or if her lungs are becoming impenetrable, if her skin becomes impenetrable, then her qi cannot flow to her in and out. So she cannot take care of others, and she cannot be taken care of, and she cannot relate to, her family, and she cannot be taken care of by her family, things like that. So I thought I have to open her skin. So I used some very simple herbs. Yes, I used Zisuye and I used Sangye, very light herbs, and Zisugeng.
Very light herbs.
Zisugeng. And I did some other stuff which is not so important. It's just like let's keep it at that level. And what has happened over the last half year, but it started to happen incredibly quickly. Yes, it started to happen within 2 weeks. So not only did the growth of hair in her skin reduce massively, but she also started to be able to form relationship with others. And she now has a boyfriend.
Wow.
Who's really caring for her. And in a way of, I've only talked with this lady 3 times. And there is a massive relationship, a change in the way of how you communicate with her. And this is confirmed by her regular practitioner. Her regular practitioner can't believe what has happened with this lady. Yes? Okay. So what I want to say is like, here I am, this guy who grew up in, who had nothing to do with Chinese medicine,
Arkansas of Germany.
Arkansas, yes. Like what I had to do with is I grew up in an interesting environment, which I tell you in a minute, but it's partly Christian and it's partly communist. And then I end up 60 years later, 60 and a bit, and I do this kind of stuff. That's kind of amazing to me, isn't it? Yes. Okay. So that's, and I think it has got something to do with, not with me. I'm just the kind of the ripple on those currents. Yes. So I thought, and I've reflected on this, obviously being a historian. So maybe what we can do, or I can do, is I tell you a little bit about myself, but I talk a little bit about myself in relationship to what I see as these kind of.
That sounds wonderful. I'm curious about the ripples, because ripples are interesting, like going to the ocean and watching waves, right? You can watch waves for hours, never be bored. Each one unique, but each one is just one breath, one movement of that greater ocean.
Something much more powerful underneath. Huh?
Yeah, which is one of the wonderful reasons for going to the ocean side and watching that, because you can imbibe that physically, and see that. So yes, yeah. I'd love to hear the ripples, because who doesn't like a good story? And I'm so glad that you point this out, because it is those deeper waves that I'm hoping over time and through these conversations, people also get a sense of. And because you have the perspective of an anthropologist, a doctor, and a historian, you can speak some to that. So let's go for a swim.
Okay. So I grew up in this little village in Germany. I was born in the late 50s, and so this village is 2/3 Catholic and 1/3 Protestant. Yes, okay. But I grew up in my immediate background was Catholic, but it's very particular kind of Catholicism, I think, because there's different types of Catholicism. So this was a Catholicism that was about the good type of Catholicism, I think. Yes, about caring for other people and caring. And so I grew up also in an environment where, in this kind of Catholicism, money was considered dirty almost. Yes. Okay. You certainly didn't do something for money. You did something because you really wanted to do something. Yes. So there was this idea of a profession or like you and doing something for others. So that obviously is one input into ending up as a doctor of Chinese medicine. Yes. Okay. And the other part is my father was a communist, and there's a story to that. But anyway, so that
I don't hear many people say my father was a communist.
he was, and I'm very glad he was.
Yeah. So he's got an interesting story too.
But that's for the mother. So I'm very glad about this. Yes. So that, but obviously he didn't really fit into that Catholic environment. But but in a way, my parents found a way to accommodate these differences. Yes. Okay. And communism and both of these bits, communism and Christianity, I think they are part of communism comes out of Germany. Yes. Okay. Marx, Engels. Yes. Okay. So to me, they come out of a very particular, there are two sides of Germany, of what I would call the German Enlightenment. And and as I didn't realize it obviously at the time in my youth and in my 20s, but over time I realized that I'm very much a child of this, what I would call this deep German Enlightenment. Yes. Okay. And the German Enlightenment is very different than the British Enlightenment because we have two inputs in it. So on the one hand, Enlightenment means, if you think about one word, it's critique. It means reflecting critically about anything that happens in the world. Yes. Okay. So science comes out of it. Yes. Okay. But also history, reflecting critically about stuff. And particularly in the period, this will be very different for your American listeners, but I'm the first post-war generation in Germany. Yes. Okay. So, our parents, not my parents, but our parents in general, were the Nazis. Yes. Okay. So also like when I started to travel, like go to France or as a teen, go to Greece, older people didn't really particularly like to have us around. You would encounter people who had experienced a lot, who had suffered a lot under German occupation. And they were not very glad to have us Germans around. Particularly we already had money again, isn't it? Yes. So there was this kind of how this way of you were something that you didn't necessarily want to be. Does it make sense to you?
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that honestly just makes running a practice easier. Let's dive into something that's never easy, but sometimes necessary: raising your fees. It can feel awkward, right? But here's a tip that can really help. Consider offering flexibility to your patients as you introduce the change. When patients face new fees, it's natural for them to feel uncertain or concerned. That's where flexibility can really make a difference. Offering options like a phased increase, suggesting a payment plan, or even taking a moment to talk things through can help to ease the transition. These thoughtful gestures show your patients that you're listening and care about them, which strengthens the trust you've worked so hard to build. If you're looking for more ideas on how to navigate these kinds of changes, head to frontdesk.jane.app and check out the article, How to Tell Clients You're Raising Your Fees. One last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, you can use the code CHIOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. Yeah, and it's not something that you were, but it's part of that cultural influence. It's part of those waves that you're talking about. There's a current that you're in.
We definitely didn't want to be as our fathers had been. Yes, okay. And if you met a German abroad, and I know that from many other people, you might as well. You would often go on to the other side of the road. Yes, okay, because you didn't want to be identified as German. Yes, my type of person. Yes, okay. So there's this thing where you somehow not totally happy with this thing, but you have to inquire all the time. How could this happen? What happened in Germany? Why? What did take place? So this relates to that critique side of things. Yes. So I grew up.
Very self-reflective.
Yes. But then, of course, and being in this Arkansas kind of Germany had many disadvantages, but had loads. In retrospect, to me, it's had lots of advantages, yes? Like one of the advantages was that the 60s arrived in the 70s, yes? That does make sense. Like everything that had gone on, like stateside, in San Francisco, kind of like, but a lot of actually your people, like when I listen to some of your podcasts, a lot of comes out of the counterculture movement, yes?
Yes, of course.
Out of the 60s. But in my part of the woods, this arrived in the 70s, yes? So a friend of mine calls us the post-hippies, yes? Okay, so...
The post-hippies.
Yes. So we were hippies, when the whole thing had already kind of like passed through its heydays, but we would listen to like the Grateful Dead and the Jefferson Airplane and a lot of English stuff, like that from the late 60s, early 70s, but this is kind of like the mid 70s, yes. And so that means so on the one hand I have this very political background, critical political background, but on the other hand I'm also grew up as this kind of like post hippie, and the post hippie is to me also very, very German in the sense of kind of like romanticism, like romanticizing everything. And
oh my gosh, yes, we did.
Yeah.
Yes, we did. I mean, it was...
very romanticizing.
I mean, I look back on some of it. It's funny. A friend of mine sent me a little meme of John Lennon and Yoko Ono at their hotel, where they were doing that. We're staying in bed for peace. And the picture was of the maid changing the sheets. And they were just like standing around till they could get back to their like taking down the system, right? I mean, it's
yes.
I mean, it's hilarious. I look at it today and I go, yeah, I was like so into that. Yes, we're gonna sit in for peace in a fancy hotel while somebody's changing the sheets. It's funny to look back on it. Yes, there's that very romantic image, and
one of the many contradictions of that time. Yeah,
huge contradictions. But yes, there was something going on, wasn't there?
And for me, that contradiction was very much between the political side of things, wanting to change the world, make it a better place, and very much anti, not just anti-establishment, but also anti our parents' generation, very much so, wanting to be totally different from that. And then that kind of romantic stuff, kind of like flower power. And anyway, so out of this, I think, and then China and India and all of that was around in Germany much longer, I think, than it had been in the States. Because think of like Richard Wilhelm, who translated the I Ching, that then C.G. Jung wrote the foreword of. This is since the 1920s. And this, like when people started to read the I Ching in England, they read it in English, whether in England or in America. They read it in the Wilhelm translation, the English translation of the German translation with C.G. Jung's foreword. I think almost all people of our generation, that's the I Ching we read, yes? Okay?
That's right. That's absolutely right.
And C.G. Jung was the first one, if you read that foreword, who drew a kind of like parallel between like, let's call it quantum physics and China and all that stuff. So, and Heisenberg and all these people, they had been in Germany. So it's been around Germany in already much earlier and much in the kind of like it was already there. And a lot of the Chinese medicine, if you think about the history, if you know about the history in Europe, it arrived first in France, Sully de Moron, that kind of stuff, acupuncture. But I think because of that's my understanding, but because in France is different than Germany. In France, you had it very quickly got assimilated into kind of Western medicine because the biomedical doctors had all the power, and they shafted Sully de Moron. Yeah, okay. Whereas in Germany, because we are this romantic nation in a certain way, and also because we have medical doctors and we have what we call Heilpraktiker, natural healthcare practitioners, as an established profession already. Yes, okay.
When was that established in Germany? How long has that been around?
Well, this is like roughly. I can't give you the exact date, but I think it's 1938. this is part of our very weird history. It got created by the Nazis because the Nazis, like Hitler sent people to Tibet, and he had part of that whole Nazi stuff is also esoteric and has got very deep roots with this holism. All the people who created this holist narrative and agenda. If you look in the West, if you look deeply into it, not all of them, but many of them have deep relationships with Nazism, with apartheid, so there's a very bad undercurrent amongst all of this. Yes, okay. Anyway, so we have this profession. So I think there was a place for acupuncture, Chinese medicine already there. And there was an interest in the East everywhere, not just in medicine, but also in, if you look at art, a lot of artists were into Japan and China. It was just in the East, yes, it was just around. So a lot of the Chinese medicine that came from France and into Germany, this is like in the 1950s. So a long time before Chinese medicine happened in the States, just 20 years before then, yes, okay. Some of the people there was a very important person, named K.O. Schmidt. He learned his Chinese medicine in Japan. He published a book in Germany in the 1960s, which has already all the Fukushin in there, has a lot of the Kampo stuff in there, has a lot of the Japanese acupuncture in there. He actually influenced the Worsley kind of people in England. So it's all already around in a way that I wasn't conscious of, but at least it was already all there. Does that make sense? Yes. So there's this kind of like interest in esoteric stuff that challenges biomedicine. There's already China, India is already there. So that's part of the whole story. And then if you look even at the first texts for our generation, do you know, not Unschuld, but do you know Manfred Porker? Does he still say something to you?
Yes. I believe it was one of the first books I looked at when I first got interested, because there weren't a lot of books. I remember reading Web That Had No Weaver, and it only confused me.
So before then,
I just thought, I'm never going to be able to learn this. And I remember going to Porker after that, hoping to get more insight.
Well, Porker published what is called the Theoretical Foundations of Chinese Medicine. He published this actually, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years before TED published The Web That Has No Weaver. But Porker came out of, again, a very German kind of humanism, where people learned Greek and Latin instead of English and French. So he made the big mistake of translating Chinese medicine into Latin. And I think that was a very big mistake on his part, because otherwise he would have been the Ted Kapchuk because he had already everything there. And there's actually an interesting story that his book, his Theoretical Foundations of Chinese Medicine, that became the model for Qi Li Lun in China itself, because there was no theoretical foundations of Chinese medicine before he wrote that book.
So that was, in a sense, imported back to China.
It was imported back to China, and out of his book, out of his theoretical foundations, came Qi Li Lun, came our TCM. It's funny, isn't it? Yeah.
It is funny. You could look at it in this way. We often go to looking at things in terms of yin and yang, right? And which is a fantastic way of looking at these vast tidal flows, how things turn into each other. I'm very struck too. I just want to put a pin in it, no pun intended, about how the Nazis also had this sort of mystical bend and this look at holism. Okay, I think all of us that practice this medicine and people that have been drawn to it, part of what we're drawn to is that sense of holism. So even in the midst of something that can be terrible, there's also these other pieces. There's always that little white dot inside of the deep dark.
Yeah. But this holism, I've written an article about it. I see it very much coming out of a German. It's part of a kind of like a German longing for some kind of unity. Yes, you have to remember Germany Germany came together as a state only in 1873, Two. Before that, we were all these little principalities. We all spoke the same language. We had the same culture, but we didn't have a state. Whereas, Great Britain, even the United States by then, France, all these other big powers, they had an identity. But the German identity wasn't a state, it was a shared culture. So Germans created out of this idea that we haven't got a country that brings us all together, but we have a language and a culture that brings us all together. So out of this, without going here in detail, that is one of the roots where this whole longing for or holism idea comes out of. Does that make sense? That it's a kind of like that a culture is something that is shared, that is something whole, that brings us all together. So like, say, Chinese medicine is a reflection of Chinese culture, and Chinese culture is about holism, and Western culture is about empiricism, and it's about breaking things apart. Does that make sense? So we attracted, not just the Germans, everybody is, to this kind of wanting to make everything that has been broken apart come together again. But it's very...
Well, again, I'm thinking about the people in the States, the hippies that were drawn to this. I think about myself and how I was drawn into the medicine. Many people, I think today, would say that they're drawn by a kind of a sense of belonging and a way of putting back together what's broken.
And a lot of these ideas, if you follow them back historically, they do come out of Germany. The idea of culture, the idea of this holism thing, blah, 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 blah. So there's something very German about it, yes, okay, which is not acknowledged anymore. It's kind of like, and it has got a lot to do with our history, yes, because we cannot be too proud about our history. But it's there. And that is one part. So this is one part of me. Does that make sense? Yes, that's kind of like one part of me. And it's actually also very interesting if you look at, I don't want to go into detail, but if you look at the Germans who are writing about Chinese medicine, like Porkert, Unschuld, there's a few other people who have never published much in English. There's some of the best Chinese books on Chinese history are written by Germans in German. And there's a beautiful book on a Ming Dynasty doctor called Wan Chen by a person called Barbara Volkmar, but it's not translated into English. There's also another person called Angelika Messner. She has written also some beautiful books, also all in German. But they're very, very different than the English books, yes? Okay, the English histories, yes? Okay? Because they are German. But what happened to me then, personally, I ended up in England, yes? Which had so my whole... At a certain point, I decided I wanted to become a herbalist. The reason for that is I grew up on a herb farm.
A communist herb farm.
And the gardener was a communist. There was a healthcare practitioner. He had certainly had roots as a Nazi. Yes. Okay. I would say, but he was an extremely successful herbalist. Yes. In the 1970s, when my father was working shortly before he died, he had about 70 people working for him.
Wow.
He was treating people, all over the world, in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, in France, in England, in Germany, in America, everywhere. But this was Western herbs, yes. And I worked there in my school holidays from when I was very young. So I have a very long background with herbs, yes. I mixed these, he was producing herbs on not on an industrial scale, but on a small industrial scale. He had about 170 mixtures of herbs, yes, okay, that he would prescribe. And in my school holidays, I mixed these herbs for him, yes. So I knew how to do that. I knew herbs. But so he became a kind of like a role model for me. So I decided I want to become a herbalist. But in Germany, because we have this natural path tradition, there was no way to study herbalism, just herbalism. You had to become a naturopath. And so you had to study a little bit of homeopathy, a little bit of physiotherapy, a little bit of herbalism, a little bit of everything. I didn't want to do homeopathy. I didn't want to do any of that. I just wanted to be a herbalist. So I had heard that in England there was a school that taught only herbalism. Yes, okay.
That was the name of it?
So
Only herbalism?
well, school of herbalism or something like.
Oh, School of Herbalism. Okay.
So I went to England, and I tried to find this school. I spent a week in London, and I went from one place to another. Every place I went to told me that this school had just moved there, and then I went there, and then it said it had moved there. And then in the end of the week, I figured out this school had closed down. Yes, so I was rather depressed, and I thought I've spent the whole week trudging around London, and so on the way home. In those days, you went by train. Yes, okay. I was in Victoria Station, and I looked around the bookshop just before I was boarding the train. I had maybe an hour left. Yes, okay. So I was looking around the bookshop there, and I found this book which has got all the courses of alternative medicine. And in those days, it was called alternative medicine. Yes, okay. So this was acupuncture, herbal medicine, homeopathy, etc., etc. And England, because it has got a different history, it didn't have any profession of homeopath or acupuncturist or herbalist. But it was, as you know, it was kind of like one of the centers of the counterculture in the West. You know, all the good music came out of England, etc.
Yeah, the British invasion.
So England was actually kind of like a place where there was a lot of opportunity in those days. And one of the signs of that opportunity was a bit similar to what happened in the States. You had these colleges and schools of all kind of alternative medicine starting to kind of mushroom, yes? So there was a school of what is called School of Phytotherapy, Herbal Medicine. And I found that in that book, and I thought, oh, great, I'm going to come to England and learn herbalism. But that school was part-time at that. So I thought, well, I come here and I do this part-time course. You know, I need to do something else. I'm being a good German. I can't just do part-time courses. I need to be full-time occupied, yes? And I leafed around this book, and it said acupuncture. And I thought, I had already, obviously I had already read Lao Tzu and I Ching and all that kind of stuff. But I thought, hey, acupuncture, that sounds cool, because if you're a herbalist, you rely on herbs. But if you're an acupuncturist, maybe you can travel more because you just need to carry a few needles, yes?
Very portable medicine.
So I thought, oh, that sounds cool. And there were 3 schools in England at that time. And I had half an hour left.
I had half an hour left.
So I phoned these schools, yes. And
from a phone booth, because
and the only school that answered was Worsley's acupuncture school. And in those days, the registrar of the school was a super nice lady called Marion Twigg. And basically, she said, "Oh, you have to come here. Yes, you are. You really need to come here. You are perfect." So in this, quarter of an hour, she taught me to study acupuncture at the Worsley School in London. And then a year later, I moved to England. I started acupuncture there, and I started herbal medicine at that other school. Initially, I commuted from Germany, but then after when we do the clinical training, I moved to England. Yeah, that's my beginnings in acupuncture. Yes, so I had no clue what acupuncture was.
It sounds cool. I need to get on a train in a half hour. Oh, this school actually answered their phone. Okay.
Yeah, so the things we do. But I think that that's how I ended up in the Worsley School, and then the Worsley School was both. You've had many people on this history series. It touched on a few people's lives in your.
Yes, it has. It's been very, especially for the early people.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, because you had a lot of Americans on there. Yes.
Well, because it was available.
Yeah.
We didn't really have it in the States.
So to me, I had no idea of what acupuncture was. So I was a bit totally naive, and it was good in some way because it made us focus on the patient. The patient was always really the center and not the disease, which I'm very glad of. But at the same time, it was a bit of it was disappointing in 2 ways. First of all, for me at that time, the choice of becoming a herbalist was also, in a certain way, a political choice. I wanted to be not part of the system. I wanted to do alternative medicine. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the first day I come into the school, in the waiting room, the teachers were reading the Daily Mail. So this is about like the most right-wing English language tabloid there is. Yes. So I thought, oh God, where am I here?
What have I done?
And then obviously this Worsley thing is a bit of a cult. J.R. Worsley was driving around with a golden Rolls Royce with a number plate JR1, bit like Bhagwan, in those days.
Mm-hmm. Except he had, I think, 77 Rolls Royces, didn't he?
That's right, he had one. And we were actively discouraged from reading books. And so it was a bit of a cult, yes. And what happened at that was also the period where Ted had just published his, the website has no weaver, and where people like Giovanni had just, Giovanni and Peter Deadman and Julian Scott, whom you had here, they just started to teach TCM. So there was this other Chinese medicine around, yes, called TCM. And
from China.
That's
an import.
And then there was also Van Buren School where Julian Scott and Giovanni and Peter Deadman had studied originally, who had a kind of like a stems and branches acupuncture. So what erupted in the early 80s when I studied in England, there was what was called the acupuncture wars, yes, okay? Different people claiming that they were practicing the proper acupuncture, yes? So that, to me then, who already had this kind of like what I explained to you in the background, a kind of like a very questioning, critical mind. I wanted to find out what was a real Chinese medicine. By that time, Ted Kapchuk had also come over and taught Chinese herbal medicine. He came over and taught 2 courses on Chinese herbal medicine. So I was already practicing at that time. I initially started to practice acupuncture and Western herbal medicine. But then I discovered there was Chinese herbal medicine. So obviously I had to study Chinese herbal medicine, yeah.
Right. Now, hang on a second. When you were going to acupuncture school, were you also going to this other herbal school?
Yeah, I was studying acupuncture and herbal medicine at the same time.
But it was the Western herbal medicine.
Western medicine. And then when I qualified,
okay,
I set up as an acupuncturist and a Western herbalist, yeah. But shortly thereafter, Ted came and did the Chinese herbal medicine. And then I thought, okay, I have to learn this. And this fitted much better into, like the Western herbal medicine was very biomedical. You used biomedical diseases, you used biomedical diagnosis, you started to prescribe herbs on the basis of their pharmacological actions, whereas Chinese medicine was very different, isn't it?
Completely different.
It tied into kind of like it was alternative in the real sense, yes, that I was looking for. So once I discovered Chinese herbal medicine, I basically gave up the Western herbal medicine, yeah, and moved over to Chinese herbal medicine. That was,
yes,
I kind of arrived where I had wanted to be, yeah.
So you arrived at what you wanted to do, but you've also taken this other path into history, into anthropology, into academics.
Yeah. So that came out of the situation that as I said, there were many ways of doing Chinese medicine. Many people claiming they were doing the right Chinese medicine, and
the true Chinese medicine.
The true Chinese. So how do I find out what's the true Chinese medicine? And then the second bit was, as I said, particularly in the Worsley school, but not just in the Worsley school. I would say the TCM people were the same, and Van Buren was the same. It was very cultish. They're male leaders, yes, male gurus and their followers, yes, okay? And this was, of course, precisely what we in Germany, I think, had enough gurus, yes, okay? We had the great leader, and I think I didn't want to march after any other great leader in my lifetime. Does that make sense? Yes, okay?
It makes total sense. I could see how you would be sort of allergic to that kind of thing.
I am allergic to that, yes, okay? And also, as I said before, the Chinese medicine as it was taught and as it was, the whole Chinese medicine culture at that time, it didn't speak to my kind of like politicized and also my more, critical orientation. Yes. Okay. So I thought I have to go back to university and I have to go to where critical thinking is done. Yes. And so I decided I thought I need to also be that's the way I can maybe answer these questions.
Volker, I love it. This is great. I can imagine you asking yourself the question or finding yourself in this situation. I need to critically figure out which of these is right. Well, how do I critically figure things out? Oh, I'm not sure. Well, I can go to school and learn something about critical thinking. And now I'll have some tools.
Yeah. So the best way I think would have, the most obvious way would have been to study Chinese. But I already had a practice at that time. And I was living in the south coast of England, and the only place you could study Chinese was in London, the closest. So commuting to London would have been like 3 hours commute a day. That was impossible, yes?
You couldn't just hop on the internet and do an online course?
Not in those days, yes. So that option was out of the window. And then because the Worsley School was very much, the kind of acupuncture I had learned at the Worsley School, they emphasize these constitutional types, which tied in a lot with psychology. So I thought maybe what I should study is psychology. That's a way of how I can connect what I'm doing with some kind of academic investigation. So I started to study psychology in Brighton, which is kind of like right next door to where I was living. And I've had lots of luck in my life. And one of the lucky things was that the way, in those days, English universities were paradise. Yes. Okay. They were paradise. Yes. Okay. I got paid to go to university for a start. Okay.
Oh, wow.
So I didn't end up with massive debt like loads of people in the States do these days. Yes. Okay. And also you had very small classes, and they really taught you to inquire into things. And I was a mature student, so I was very interested in what I was doing. So my professors and my lecturers, they really liked me. Yes, okay, and I got on very well with them. And also the way it was organized, I studied psychology in what was called the School of African and Asian Studies.
Having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things you can do as a healthcare practitioner, because a robust business is the ultimate expression of vital qi, and that's the heart of our medicine. I'm Julie Bairdontlock, and I help practitioners grow nourishing, profitable, authentic businesses that embody the generative cycle of Chinese medicine. This isn't about all yang all the time. It's about expanding your own internal capacity, growing collaborative relationships with your patients for ethical patient retention, and marketing as an extension of this medicine, not a necessary evil. You already know that everything is connected in your patients' lives and bodies. The same is true for your business. When we align your systems, your schedule, your pricing, and your offerings with you, we create flow, which means more spaciousness, more impact, and more joy. When you are in the flow, fully resourced in terms of qi, time, and money, your business becomes a source of healing, not just for your patients, but for you. Let's grow something rooted, radiant, and real. Visit lifeflowconsulting.com to learn more.
Now that's a curious crossroad. African and Asian studies and psychology, how did that come about?
Well, it was just like how the university was organized. You had to be in a school. Yes, okay. There were various schools, School of Social Science, School of African and Asian Studies, which meant that half of your course you had to do African and Asian stuff. Yes, okay. So, for instance, I did 1 whole year medical anthropology, and I did a whole year of science studies. And that was when I was doing the herbal medicine with Ted. Ted was at that time really into medical anthropology. So I knew what this stuff was about. And then here I could actually study it. Yes. And yeah, that gave me the tools that gave me the tools of critical thinking. I really enjoyed that. And I really enjoyed the thinking, and I really enjoyed the studying. So once I'd done my bachelor's, I knew I wanted to do a PhD. And I wanted to do the PhD on Chinese medicine, and I wanted to do the PhD in medical anthropology. I knew that by then.
And maybe you would get the answer to what's the true medicine.
And then in one of those... Exactly. And in one of those many... I went to a conference, Chinese medicine conference in Oxford, and there was Ted Kapchuk again. He appeared twice in my life in a kind of like an important way. So he was there, and and Elizabeth Shue was there with him. And Elizabeth Shue had just finished her PhD in Cambridge. And we had dinner in the evening, and she said, you have to go and study with my supervisor. He's fantastic, blah, blah, blah. So, okay. So I phoned him. And in those days, England was very different than it's now. So I just phoned him and said, I sent you an application form. This was kind of like a two-page A4 where you just put in your name and your address and what you had done. And he knew the head of the School of African and Asian Studies in Brighton, called Professor Grillo. My supervisor was called Lewis. And they phoned each other, and he said, Volker is a really good guy. You should take him on. So he took me on, and I ended up doing my PhD in medical anthropology in Cambridge. Yeah, this I had to pay for. But I tried to, another thing I've always tried to do in my life, I tried to kind of like kill two birds with one stone. So the thing about anthropology is you have to do field work, don't you? That's you have to go somewhere, look at what the natives do, and that's what you write your PhD on. So I thought, obviously I was going to go to China. So I went to China, and basically what I did for a year, I went to hospitals, and studied with people. And this was going to be and I somehow had to write a PhD on this. And the question was, for me...
And you get to learn some Chinese medicine.
That's right. So I learned Chinese medicine while I was doing my PhD. And my question was, what's the real Chinese medicine, of course, yes, okay. But I figured out in the course of doing that, as you know, that I figured out there was no real Chinese medicine. That Chinese medicine was what I called plural, yes. There were many ways there was not just one way of Chinese medicine, but many different ways of Chinese medicine. So I then wrote, I had one of the other piece of luck that many other lucky coincidences, because my supervisor, he was a very good anthropologist, but he knew nothing about China. Elizabeth hadn't told me that, yes. But anyway, so I thought I need somebody who knows Chinese medicine. And as I was doing my PhD, Judith Farquhar, maybe your readers know or don't know her. She wrote the first anthropological book about Chinese medicine called Knowing Practice.
Knowing Practice?
And
what a great title.
Knowing Practice. It's a fantastic book. And on the one hand, it was very disheartening because I thought, she has already done whatever. There's nothing for me left to do. She's
right. It's been done.
Written the book, Chinese medicine. So what do I do now? I write to her. So I wrote to her, and she became my informal supervisor, and she's become a lifelong mentor. So that was fantastic. And she really helped me to think a lot and develop as an academic. So I owe an awful lot to her, just as much as to my real supervisor, Gilbert Lewis. And out of that came my first book called Chinese Medicine in Contemporary China. But I also, going to China, this is kind of like the early 1990s. I encountered a very different Chinese medicine than I had learned in the UK. Yes, okay. TCM was cutting edge in those days. Yes, remember that. Yes, that was kind of like the most cutting edge Chinese medicine there was. But nobody had read the Shanghan Lun or the Jingui or Wenbing. No, people didn't know what that was. I did in Ted's course, we did Shanghan and Wenbing like in 3 hours. Yes, okay. So basically, we didn't do it. Porkat had written a book on Shanghan, but that was unintelligible, really. Yes, okay. So I came to China, and then suddenly, apart from doing the anthropological stuff, I did a whole year. I studied Shanghan, I studied Wenbing,
What was it like to be in China. Now, did you have some Chinese before you went there, or did you learn it in China?
Yes, I had learned Chinese. Yeah, I learned all of that on the go, as it were. Yeah.
On the go, yeah, exactly. So you land in China. You've got this background with some acupuncture. You've got the background with some herbs from TED and your Western herbalism. And then you come across in Chinese stuff like the Shanghanlun. What was that like for you to like pick that up and start to read it? What did that do to you?
Yeah, and that was, again, it's in a certain way like I arrived in England. I arrived with Ted and he taught me herbal medicine, but now I arrived with the real, like there was something totally, this was like, there was suddenly something that there was something beyond, kind of like there was something. It's difficult to put into words. Yes, so it's kind of like you go into a library, like you've only read 3 books and then suddenly you go into a library, like you went into bookshops and there was like 1,000 books on Chinese medicine. Yes, and there was not just the Shanghan, there was kind of like 50 books on the Shanghan. Yes, and there was not Li Dongyuan, there was like 5 books on Li Dongyuan. And so that was just like, it was very difficult to communicate that to people who had never been in China, isn't it? There's so much more beyond TCM textbooks, isn't it? It's kind of like imagine it's like doing Italian. In England, there's a dish called spagbol. Do you say that in America as well? It's called spaghetti bolognese. Yes, okay.
Oh yeah. Spaghetti and meatballs.
So the English call it spagbol. Yeah, okay. So imagine this is your understanding of Italian cookery, isn't it? Yes. And then imagine you go to Italy and suddenly you discover, 100 types of pasta, each with its own sauce and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, okay?
Yeah. It just, it totally upends your world. I remember as I was learning Chinese, I spent some time in Beijing and I think it was Craig Mitchell slipped Shi Da Lei Fang into my hands. And he said, read this. and my Chinese wasn't that great at the time. I remember starting to read it and thinking, my Chinese is really awful. And it might be getting worse because I was reading that book and I never read anything like that in English.
Mm.
And I thought, it's like, I don't think I'm understanding this. And then I kept reading it and I realized, wait a minute, I am understanding this. But this is nothing like anything I've read before.
Yeah, it's difficult to, it's like...
And it just, it changes your world. It's very, very weird. And it's a great good fortune. There's so much that's out there about this medicine. It's we like to talk about it being vast, but it's like a damn ocean.
Yes, so we haven't even kind of like we just dipped our toes into all of it, isn't it? Yes. But the good thing was,
well, we're kind of surfing at the beach at this point. We can have fun with it.
It's much better than it was.
Yeah.
But the good thing at that time for me already was that I wasn't. The good thing was also that I wasn't a novice anymore, because I already knew my formulas. And as you know, if you've been in China, if a doctor writes a formula and you know what formula that is, that gives you, he thinks, maybe this person is worth investing a little bit of time. He's not totally stupid, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think most teachers are like that. It's not that they're someone's stupid, someone's not. It's like, where is some fertile ground that some of what I have to pass on can take root?
So I got assigned to some teachers, by the hospital, and there was one person who really, I thought I would like to study with him. Basically in the first week, after the morning in the hospital, we went together in the lift. So I said, "Oh, this last prescription you used, that's Li Dongyuan, isn't it?" And he looked at me and said, "How should I?" And it created a rapport between us, yes. And then he became one of my really guiding lights into the world of Chinese medicine. He was, again, I think, as you said before, now, like loads of people know what the Shanghan is and have studied it quite deeply, and people study the Neijing deeply and other texts quite deeply. So the people that taught us, I think, are also the people that taught me are a generation earlier than the people that teach now, 1 or 2 generations earlier. So these people in China then, I think, were very different than the people who teach now. So this particular teacher, first of all, they didn't, like the word that you hear now everywhere, lineage holder. Nobody would have used, that's a word nobody probably even knew then. Yes, okay, nobody was the holder of any lineage or anything. People the people that taught me, they believed in they came out of that, they came out of that, I think, out of an ethics of wanting to serve the people. They wanted to, again, make a difference. They wanted to be there and help to make this new China a success. And they were also validated by, like Chinese medicine being part of that new China. And they themselves, like my teacher, he knew the Shanghan and he knew everything by heart. But he also had been in Japan. So, he was using Kampo formulas. He also was very, very interested in biomedicine. So he was blood stasis was a big thing in those days. He's incredibly open-minded. He was also an artist. He had survived the Cultural Revolution by painting Mao portraits, yes. And he always taught me, you have to be flexible, not just in your clinical practice, but also in life. And he taught me medicine is like an art. There was no difference between me painting and me writing prescriptions, yes. And he wrote beautiful prescriptions. He was famous in the hospital, not just for being an incredibly good doctor. He was also famous for his his calligraphy of writing, the formulas, yes. And he taught me open-mindedness within Chinese medicine, yes. And so I was very lucky to find this Shi Caixiang. He's called the very, 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 very good teacher. I had many good teachers, but he was kind of like my formative one. So like Judy, in anthropology. And then I had a few more mentors. He was my first Chinese medicine teacher, and I'm very glad that he gave me that introduction into Chinese medicine.
You have had good luck.
Yeah, I have. I've always met the right people at the right moment in time, yeah.
Well, and managed to make the right phone calls at the right time. It's funny how luck works. It's not a passive thing.
No, the wave comes along and you have to jump onto it, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah, luck is never like, oh, this train is standing still.
Yeah.
And I'm going to leisurely get on. No, it's more like this train is leaving the station. Run.
But I'm also, I think, so my period of, I belong to an incredibly fortunate generation. Yes. Like one of the fortunes, as I said to you before, we were paid to study.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the first generation in my family who went to university. Yes, so I come from this kind of like lower middle class background.
Arkansas redneck.
Yeah.
Hippie Arkansas redneck.
But, I could go to school. I could go to university. I ended up in Cambridge of all universities. Yes. Okay.
Surprising.
From there, I studied acupuncture. Acupuncture didn't, I never was in debt. I could work on the side to pay my fees without, that wasn't a problem at all. We started practicing. It took a little while at that point because there were already quite a few acupuncturists around, but within a year had a busy practice.
Busy practice within a year. How?
Yes.
And this is like the beginning of acupuncture really starting to happen there. What do you attribute that to?
Well, those, again, this was a post-hippie phase. There was a lot of this alternative thing. People were, in the same way that nowadays people take, they're really into supplements and biohacking and whatever they call it. Yes, okay. So in those days, it was just like, people started to take an interest in what was called alternative health. And, there was an openness towards that kind of stuff. Because all these, a lot of people had been hippies themselves, isn't it? Yes. But by, organic food started to come. The health food shops came into being, yes?
There were a bunch of people in the States that got their start with health foods.
Yes.
And then that went into Chinese medicine and acupuncture.
Yeah. So there was, as I understand it now, this is not my thinking, this is accepted thinking, because 68, the revolution failed. Yes. Okay. We didn't change society. So people went into kind of like, we cannot change society, but we can change maybe individual lives. So people turn, there's a massive turn towards psychology, towards, forms of psychotherapy, that kind, but also alternative medicine. Yes. Okay. Is part of that wanting to, come out of that 50s, 60s, 70s, out of the failed revolution comes this turn towards individualized health. Yes. And that was, that I was part of that generation. Yeah. Okay. But it was still, I think that's again, very different to today. It was kind of like not about making money or even having a profession. It was just like, to me at least, and then, my wife and other people, it was part of, we want to change the world. You were young, but...
It's a way to change the world. And look, you need to make some money as well. So if you can change the world and manage to put food on the table, I mean, that's a good thing.
But we were so lucky that just happened. You know what I mean? Yes, that's what I mean. We were unbelievably lucky. Property was cheap. We didn't have enormous mortgages. Yes, everything. And then as time went on, like for instance, so by then this is like the early 2000s. Yes. By the early 2000s, I have my PhD. I have a practice, and academia is still, unlike now, is still in a kind of like a reasonably good state of health. So there's funding available. So first of all, I got funding to do a postdoc. So I could go to China again for 2 years to do postdoctoral studies. Yes. Okay. So that's where my second book comes out of. Again, I was paid for this. Yes. So that's, and again, I did the same.
Good way to make a living.
That's the same, not massive amounts, but I got paid. Yes. So I did the same thing that I did first time round. I studied and I wrote about what I studied. Yes. So I did this.
And you learned something.
When I was in Beijing to do my PhD, one of my teachers was a student of Qin Wei. Qin Wei, maybe some people know, because Chip Chase translated a book by him. So Qin Wei was an important teacher he was one of the architects of TCM, you might call it, yes. But he and a bunch of other people in Beijing, they came out of Shanghai and they had studied at a school by a doctor called Dingan Ren. Dingan Ren is a person who in 1916, he established a college in Shanghai, which became the kind of like most influential Chinese medicine school in China during the Republican period, yes. And a lot of the people who created TCM and created modern Chinese medicine come out of that school in one way or another. And so I knew about Qin Wei, I knew about Dingan Ren, and a colleague of mine in the UK, Bridie Andrews, who had also just then completed her PhD and was doing a postdoc, and she was very good with writing grants. When I read her PhD, it said, okay, this guy called Dingan Ren, he comes from a place called Menghe, and there are some doctors called the Menghe Xuepai, the Menghe current of Chinese medicine. So I thought, maybe what I could do is I could follow this history backwards. Yes, I know already my teacher, Qin Wei, Dingan Ren, and then there's something behind that. So I wrote, and Bridie helped me to write this proposal. So I said, I'm going to study Chinese medicine through the Menghe Xuepai, and I got funding for this. So then I went to China, and that I've had so many, this is another piece of incredible luck and incredible fortitude. So while I was in China, so I had already started my research, and I had started to trace the Ding family tree back to Menghe. Yes, okay. And this was in the kind of like first half year of my research. But I was still, I was at the time still, I was teaching herbal medicine in Germany at the time. So I needed to go back to Germany to teach for 2 months. So meanwhile, my wife was in China and she got a cold and she didn't speak Chinese. So she had to find Chinese medicine. I said, why don't you go and have Chinese medicine? So she found, through some people from Africa, she found a Chinese medical doctor who could speak a bit of English, yes? And then I came back a few months later, 2 months later, and she told me, I went to see this doctor. He was really good. He helped me with this really bad cough. So I said, what's his name? She said, he's called Ding something, Ding Yi. So I said, maybe it's got something to do with my Ding family, yes? So next time she went to see him, I went with her and I said, do you have anything to do with Ding Ganren? And I said, how do you know Ding Ganren? So I showed him the family tree of his family. And he had this, he said, how does this guy know my family's family tree?
Yeah. What are you, a spy?
And then, of course, we became very good friends, and he opened all the doors to me in this, he put me in touch with loads of people, and he became a kind of like incredibly good informant for my research. So, is this luck? Is this coincidence? What is it? It's...
Young fun.
Yeah, young fun. Yeah, young fun. So the right people appeared always. And then, so I did this. So again, it was very fictitious because these Hmong people, I thought there's this kind of like Hmong tradition, like they also have a particular way of doing medicine. It turns out they don't have a way of doing medicine, but they have a very good way of social networking. Yes, okay? They're very good at, at least Ding Ganren was setting up this school. He was a very good networker, social networker. So in Shanghai at that time. And then before, the people earlier was not the Dings, but another family called the Feis. They go back 400 years until 1626. Yes. Okay. So I was able to trace Chinese medicine from kind of like 1626 to the present. And the interesting thing, again, so I learned through one of my informants that, what's his name? The guy who taught a lot of Westerners in New York, Dr.
Oh, John Shen?
Dr. Shen, yes.
Yeah.
Dr. Shen. He had, he taught this very, very famous seminar in London in the early 80s. So we all knew Dr. Shen as a kind of like famous Chinese medicine practitioner. And so it turned out there's this Dr. Shen also had studied at Ding Ganren's school. So the last interview I did in this research, Dr. Shen came back to Shanghai to die. Yeah. And I knew the people that he was connected with in Shanghai. So they made me a connection with him. So my last interview that I did for that particular book was with Dr. Shen, who had come back to China to die. So again, that was a very, very...
Wow. Talk about full circle.
Kind of full circle experience, yes.
I don't remember that from reading your book. I'm going to have to go reread that part.
Yeah. He studied at the school, but he never wanted to be, he wanted to be his own man. Yes. He didn't want to be a student of Ding Ganren. He wanted to be Dr. Shen. Yes. Okay. And he went on to be Dr. Shen. Yes. Okay. So very successfully. Yes. But there's this connection. Everything is in the world of Chinese medicine. Everything is somehow connected. And I think in the world of Chinese medicine, these social connections, which we think don't matter so much, we want to always, or if there's a social connection, we want to translate that social connection into some kind of, like a lineage or something else. Yes. Okay. I think those two things are very separate. Like making social connection, as you know, in our world, we need to make social connections, isn't it, to live. And Chinese...
Well, it's the way humans get along. We're social creatures. We need each other. The connections we have, it helps to build our community, but our community also supports us. We can't live without our social connections. It's vital.
And really, my Chinese teachers really, they impressed this on me and they taught that to me. So for instance, there was one... So the Ding Ganren school was the most famous school in Shanghai in the 20s, 30s, 40s. But Ding Ganren was a little bit more, shall we say, conservative. Yes. Okay. But then there were some very kind of like more radical young reformers of Chinese medicine. And the most radical reformers of them was called Lu Yuanlei. These people, these reformers, they wanted to kind of create some fusion of Chinese medicine and Western medicine. Yes. Okay.
Integrated medicine.
And they did that very much. But they did that very much through Japan and the Shanghan. A lot of what a lot of that Jingfang stuff comes from Japan via these people. So I and Ding Ganren's grandson, who is the father of my informant, Dr. Ding Yi, he had something to do with Lu Yuanlei. And I thought, okay, they must be somehow opposed to each other, because one is kind of like this conservative tradition, the other one is this kind of radical modernizer. And then Ding Yi, Dr. Ding, he was my informant. He said, "What are you talking about? Lu Yuanlei, he used to come to our house, every week, and they used to have dinner, and they were great friends, and they were blah, 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 blah." So maybe they had different opinions about how Chinese medicine should be developed, but, they agreed on very many other things. They could talk about cases, they could have dinner together, they could talk about opera and whatever, politics and whatever else connected them in the world, yes? So I think there is a world of Chinese medicine, like in this big world, like the ocean of Chinese medicine, yes? There are people that are connected to each other. And there's also ideas, but the ideas and the people, it's not like people can connect even so they don't share the same ideas, or like, for instance, I have so many nice stories. So Ding Ganren, Ding Ganren's son died the first son died very early. So the second generation kind of like was a bit bypassed. So there's a third generation which becomes his successors. Yes. Okay. So especially the first grandson in the male line. Yes. Okay. He becomes his successor. But then there are other grandsons, and these other grandsons are also doctors. So one of the grandsons says, "Well, if I stick around in this family tradition, I can never make a name for myself." Yes. Okay. So if I want to make a name for myself, I have to do the opposite of what the Dings do. Yes. Okay. So the Dings are Shanghai people. So he chose a northern practitioner as his model, and he developed his practice. He became the self-styled rebel in the family. Does that make sense? Okay, so, which is important for the story that I was telling in the beginning. So what I learned from him, from this rebel in the Ding family, is that you can think of excessive growth, thickening of the skin, not excessive growth of hair, but thickening of the skin in autoimmune disease. You can think of it as a lung excess, and you can treat it with these herbs like zisu, ye, sanye, ma huang, those kind of herbs. So that's what I learned from him. So that is, one of how this guy from German Arkansas could treat this young woman is because he ended up hanging around with people in the Ding family, telling him their little medical secrets, as it were. Does it make sense? Yes. Okay. So that's, and all these connections go via personal connections. Yes. Okay. Via me having met Ted, via having met Elizabeth, via having met my supervisor, via met Judy, via having met certain teachers in Beijing who introduced me to other teachers, via people who helped me to write my grant proposal. There's a whole Guanxi network, yes, okay, that leads from in a direct, there's a materially embodied Guanxi network that leads from my little village in Germany to treating this woman. Does that make sense? Yes, okay. It's not just that's one of the things that got me there. Yes, if that makes sense. Yes, okay. It's one of the sides of the story.
One of the sides of the story. There's something you said a few minutes ago about lineage. It seems to me, look, I'm an opinionated guy, and I'm often wrong, so I may have a different opinion next month. It seems that there's almost a kind of fetish that we have at this point for lineage, that if I'm connected to a lineage and I'm connected to a history, then I'm connected to a medicine that empowers me in some way. Sure, it can give you some social prestige, and we all need that, so fair enough. And I know from my own experience of wanting to feel connected to the history, it's because I didn't understand the medicine well enough, and I didn't have the skill well enough to really be able to help people in a way. That it takes more time and more effort to learn through the kind of network connections that you've been discussing here with us today. Something comes out of that we earn something, we get something that allows us to, in a moment like you just described, help this woman with some very light exterior releasing types of herbs to open up the lung.
Yeah.
But it's like we don't get that from the lineage. We get it from our experience of walking through our life with these questions.
Well, I think there is, like lineage, the way I agree with you, there's a bit of a fetish on this, because this type of lineage is kind of like a very reductionist, like you have to be part of this kind of like master teach, kind of like a rigid structure. But what I just described to you, there's a whole world of Chinese medicine that's not rigid. That's actually very fluid. Yes. Okay. And I think for most parts of its history, that fluid model that is how Chinese medicine is. This is how it survives. Yes. Okay. Because it's fluid. You can make the connections that are appropriate for you. Like you need to search for something. You need to go this way. You need something else. You go that way. Maybe at this, does it make sense? And also there's friendship. There's many different ways there's not just lineage master teaching relationship. There's one of the most important things in China is friendship. Like I described to you between Lu Yuanlei and this Ding doctor. Yes, there's friendship. And there's many friendships amongst these, amongst people of the same generation, or, the people who call each other older brother, younger sister, that kind of stuff. Yes, okay. Friendship is really important. These kind of, and knowledge gets passed on through that kind of stuff. Yes, okay. Or the way we know each other. We have met each other once or twice in real life, but, we share some kind of connection with each other, don't we? Yes, okay. And
for a long time, Volker.
Yeah, and that's how it. So I think that lineage stuff. There are also. Let me give you another example that really relates both to what I've learned about Chinese medicine and directly to this lineage model. So, as you know, this current lineage discourse is also very much tied in with a kind of like a discourse that calls itself Jingfang and is related to a kind of Shanghan Lun kind of stuff. And the big enemy of the Shanghan Lun people are the Wenbing people, isn't it? That's historical. Like there's kind of like an imagined, whatever it is, break, tension.
An imagined rivalry,
blah, blah, blah. So first of all, that rivalry is totally imagined. Yes, okay, because the people who came up with the Wenbing stuff, I've put a lot of my energy into that. They simply develop out of Shanghan stuff. Yes, okay. But there's in Chinese medicine, there are many different ways of how you can keep this social connection. Keep Chinese medicine alive in kind of social networks. So lineage is one, guanxi is another one, friendship is another one. But historically, another one is also, because Buddhism is a big, for at least many periods in Chinese medicine, there's also Buddhist discourse is very important. And in Buddhist discourse, there's something called the Dharma transmission. Does it say anything to you?
Yeah, a little bit. I've touched in on Buddhism a little bit, but the Dharma transmission is another. Would you say it's a guanxi network?
No, a teacher transmits his Dharma is the teaching. Yes, okay. So a teacher transmits the teaching to a particular person, his student. Yes, okay. But that doesn't mean that teacher has to teach what his teacher taught. It basically means he is authorized to teach. This student embodies the Dharma. He embodies the teaching. So, like, to be very concrete, so some people in the way this is not like modern people, this is people in the 18th, 19th century, yes? So they would say Ye Tianshi, which is the kind of like the big shot, the Wenbing big shot, yes, okay? Ye Tianshi, he's Zhang Zhongjing's, the Shanghan big shot, he's Zhang Zhongjing's Dharma heir. Does that make sense? There's Zhang Zhongjing, who is really important person, and there's Ye Tianshi, who's really important person. But what they both teach the Dharma. They both embodiments of what we call true Chinese medicine. Yes, okay. But they embody true Chinese medicine in very, very different ways. But that doesn't mean that one is better than the other. Does that make sense? That just means Zhang Zhongjing did what had to be done in the Han Dynasty. Ye Zhenshi did what needed to be done in the 17th century. Yes, okay? So,
Volker, I love it. Embody the true Chinese medicine in different ways.
yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Does it make sense? Yes. So if you have that model of the Dharma transmission, I like that. Yes. Okay. So you still need to, Ye Zhenshi knew his stuff. You cannot just, you don't become a Dharma heir by your own imagination. People have to recognize you as such. Yeah. Okay. But that liberates you from having to do what the teacher does. Yes. I mean, Chinese medicine also has a lot of, that saying, like the good student should be like indigo. Yes, okay. He becomes better than his teacher. He doesn't
becomes different than his teacher. Becomes different. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because indigo is more refined than the plant, isn't it? Yes, okay. So a good student shouldn't be the copy of his teacher. He should go beyond what his teacher is. Or at the very least, he should be able to create the medicine that is appropriate for that patient at that moment in time, irrespective of what your teacher did. Does it make sense? Yes. Okay.
I mean, that's our work. This is the wonderful thing. This is why I love going into my clinic, because I don't know what's going to happen, and I have this opportunity in a moment, hopefully, to create something that's helpful for somebody. And it comes out of everything that I've learned, but you never know until the moment when it arises.
So that's the second bit that relates me. So the Dharma transmission in a certain way is the second bit that relates back to the story that I told you in the beginning. Because, so if you think about it, you could relate it back to Zhang Zhongjing and you could say this is a Taiyang pattern. Yes, there's excess in the exterior. But then you're stuck with Ma Huangtang. And for certain reasons, this person was sweating a little bit. Yes, okay. There were other reasons that I think Ma Huangtang is a very physical formula. I thought this wasn't appropriate. Sisuye, Imbanjia Hopotang, and also Sangye, they're very light herbs. So I think for that kind of Shen issue that she had, that was much more appropriate to me. And that comes out of, the whole Wenbing people. They like to do what they call using light herbs for a big hit. So use very light herbs to achieve magical effect, if that makes sense. Yes, okay?
Seemingly magical, but it's the right thing.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the second thing. And the third thing is, if I wouldn't have been a historian, and this come out of me working on my current project, which is Chinese medicine in 17th century China, I wouldn't have learned that things like taking care of each other, our connection to the world, to the 10,000 things, to the other people, to the other things in the world, is not just an attitude in our head. It requires for our qi to be flowing in and out of each other, out of us and into things, and out of things into us. So maintaining kind of like the right kind of permeability between us and the outside world is an incredibly important thing. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, herbs can be the tool that allows us to do that. So that's the other aspect of that. That ties back to my initial case. Yeah.
It's a long road from Arkansas, Germany, Volker.
Well, it's been fun, huh? It's been
Yes.
I hope I could convey you some of the fun and the excitement and the incredible pleasure I had on that ride. Yeah.
Yeah. It is fun. And the piece about friendship, I don't think it gets spoken about often enough.
It's important.
I think so.
And so many good friends.
So I appreciate the reminder. All right. Well,
okay.
We need to wind this down for today.
Thanks again.
Although we could probably go for hours. Maybe we'll come back and talk some more another time.
Okay. Thanks for today.
Thank you, Volker. Always a pleasure.
Okay. Thank you.
That wraps it up for today. So curious, the paths that lead us to do what we do. Volker starting out in the Arkansas of Germany and ending up in Cambridge, it goes to show you the possibilities that can unfold when you're following a hunch about something that really has your attention in an unrelenting way. I've noticed too, much like in Volker's case, that when you're honed in on something and really going at it, that fortuitous opportunities often arise. You can't command them. It's more they're conjured out of something like dogged attention, persistence, and synchronicity. More often than not, these are pivotal moments that need to be grasped immediately, or they vanish just as quickly as they appeared. Volker's question about what is the, air quotes here, true Chinese medicine, I think reflects on a concern that many of us have, especially when considering that TCM is a creation of the last century and that East Asian medicine is more like a pantheon of practices rather than a monotheistic one true method. I suspect I'm not alone in having struggled with this, as I've grown up in a monotheistic culture and one that is constantly looking for the one true unifying truth. So, plurality of East Asian medicine for me has been both a little disconcerting and at the same time, in a way, liberating. That the medicine we practice is more of an ecosystem of methods, that its plurality is an aspect of its strength. These are compelling ideas that have taken me a long time to live into. The case that Volker started off with, on one hand, it's always a delight to hear of a troublesome case and how Chinese medicine had a way to help. But more than that, to hear his thinking about how he was able to come to the clinical conclusions that he did, to trace the path of connections and influences that allowed him that insight. That, I think, speaks to something about the medicine we practice that gets to the essence of the work. And finally, the role of friendship. I'd not really thought about that until he mentioned it. And then I began to reflect on the pivotal moments that have brought me to this moment. Friendship. It's not insignificant, and perhaps too often an unconsidered aspect of how we learn and practice our trade. Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.